Greetings and thank you for joining us. We would like to talk a little bit today about two things that you probably know about already, Abhyasa and Vairagyam. And they're terms that first turn up for most of us when we are beginning to read the Yoga Sutra. And they begin with verse 12 in the Yoga Sutra in chapter 1. And so most of us have made it that far, which is sometimes as far as we get.
Yeah, so it's the only verse we can remember.
But they appear, Abhyasa and Vairagyam are the ideas really that appear right after the idea of chittavrittis, or the sort of fluctuations of mind, or this non-stillness of mind are that fact is addressed in the Yoga Sutra. And so it's right at the beginning, and in fact, Abhyasa and Vairagyam are the primary and preliminary reference to practice, because Abhyasa really is the practice that you can do, as is Vairagyam, to begin to find this embodied sense of Nirodha. So we'll talk a little about what they mean and some of the context of them, and then maybe how they get misinterpreted in today's world, or other times too, I'm sure.
Right, or interpreted also by raw beginners.
Yeah, I'll take that role.
Right. Okay. Well, first, remember that yoga is defined as chittavritti nirodha, and I love to define nirodha as suspension, in which the different fluctuations of the mind, the manifestations of the mind, all of them, they can be suspended. And when you do that, then what we call the seer, or that which is just pure seeing, is established in its true nature.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there's an identity that's formed between the what is being perceived, and then there's a theoretical perceiver, which is formed by ego.
Mm-hmm.
And
that would be you.
Not
Not
who
you,
you think you,
but
not
who
you,
you
but the
think
real,
you are,
no,
yeah.
not the real you, but the you. Anyway.
Yeah.
And so then the chittavrittis, or the vritti, remember, means to twist, and that's when you take nama and rupa, and you take something, and then you get and you, of course, your mind immediately makes a label for it, or a code for it, and then you get them confused. That's a little twisting or turning. And you can even have vrittis about vrittis, and you can even have a name for a name, and you can just go on and make a kind of a complex situation, kind of like life. And so, and these chittavrittis are, many of them are miserable, they're klishta, but occasionally they're aklishta, and so many are neutral, and occasionally, which they're just part of ordinary functioning, as are all of them. But occasionally you get some that are actually like, wow, that's kind of beautiful or nice, inspiring. And so then they're defined very carefully, and that's a whole nother subject. But then, after they're all defined, then you get to verse 12. Abhyasa Vairagyam tan nirodha. And meaning, so tan is referring back to all of the different chittavrittis, and they are all made nirodha, or they're suspended by this twofold process of abhyasa and vairagyam.
And so sometimes Abhyasa is translated as sort of effort or intention or practice. It's talked of as the sort of effort that is put into things.
Yeah. And it's like pushing isn't really the right word,
Yeah.
but it's effort, it's activity to get to particular place.
Yeah.
And so I think abhyasa can mean like the moving towards sitting down
Yeah.
or moving towards something. And that, of course, would involve, maybe subtle work, maybe actual physical work.
And then the Vairagyam is often referred to, and we were talking about this earlier. Vairagyam often is talked about sometimes as something like sort of this, not the suspension, but the stopping. Often it is described as, or finding release and detachment. Sometimes it's talked of. And to me, the thing that I find slightly uncomfortable about detachment or release is that sounds final. It sounds like it's a thing that stops with that you not have this sense of suspension that you were describing in
Right.
Nirodha, and the process of Abhyasa and Vairagyam working together to create Nirodha, then it insinuates, if Vairagyam is detachment or complete release, that then it stops there.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's a little thing that, especially as a beginner, when I was reading this, that was a confusing point for me.
Yeah. So vairagyam. So raga means passion, and it could be good passion or bad passion. You could have, a conceptual passion to even make all beings happy, which is the recommended passion. But but more likely throughout the day, you'll find that you have many other passions in relation to food and physical feelings and sickness, old age, and so. But vairagyam is and so you're not treating anything as if it is something to be pushed away, because that would be, like yuck. There is samsara, I'm going to push it away, or that's all just prakriti, I want to nirod it, meaning hit it down, I'll get rid of it. But it's just like, And so I really like the image of vairagyam as release, and in the sense of letting go, not in the sense of leaving it, but in the sense of radiance. And for example, the idea that, and it's from the Ishopanishad, the first verse, Ishavaisham idam sarvam. All of this is said is enveloped or surrounded by, permeated by Ishvara, the beloved. And to make the verse short, therefore, letting go is the supreme enjoyment.
Yeah.
Is joy. And so just like if you were a star, not a movie star, but like a
Celestial star.
celestial star. Well, perhaps that's the same thing.
As a movie star.
Then just when you just shine, and you don't hold on to your own, and you're not doing anything for your false sense of self, and therefore it's just like, and that is considered, that's a metaphor for the feeling of nirodha, and the feeling of vairagyam,
Yeah.
and the feeling of kaivalyam, which is coming.
Yeah.
And so and in that way you can have your abhyasa and your vairagyam, and they don't contradict each other, but they really serve each other.
And one mistake that many of us have made or tend to make with Abhyasa and Vairagyam is that they are opposites rather than they are part of sort of a continuum, in a sense. And they are so profoundly and deeply intertwined that they really don't function well on their own.
Yeah, like inhaling and exhaling.
Exactly.
Prana and apana, yeah.
And so to release something or to set it free with space and your attention still being given to it in a sense, to hold space for it. In order to do that, you have to have had the sense of abhyasa first. You have to have had the sense of effort or entanglement, if you even want to say that, or interfacing with it,
Yeah,
in
interfacing.
order to be able to let it be or release it.
Yeah. So, Abhyasa and Vairagyam are something that we do obviously in yoga practice, but actually people are doing it all the time, and you don't have to call it yoga practice. And so Abhyasa is that endeavor to focus the mind, to understand something or to get some result, um, and then Vairagyam is just let go. It doesn't mean it was stupid, it doesn't mean it was bad, even though it might have been, but it could have been a wonderful thing. But it's just a way then of just seeing, of observing. And so it's just like if people were actually studying something or actually communicating, you would try to explain something, and then you would pause and open your ears, and maybe your breath might even stop if you've been doing a lot of yoga. And in that way, you can see if there's any feedback. And so a good scientist is doing a form of abhyasa and vairagyam constantly. In fact, everybody does it in some realm of their life if they're able to walk down the street successfully. Okay. With crutches or no crutches, yeah. And so these two, they work together and in all different aspects of life. But then when you come down to yoga practice, which is the endeavor to really see what is really happening. So it's like I was going to say science gone wild, but it really is. Like, it's this questioning, it's an excitement with the nature of reality. So I want to look and look and look more deeply. And in order to look, I have to focus the mind with abhyasa. So I need to develop some kind of technique to focus the mind. And this is what then is defined as abhyasa. So you find something that interests you or that excites you, and then you want to focus on it. So something in your mind says, oh, that is very interesting. And it could be the Yoga Sutra, it could be the sensation patterns in your body, it could be the breath patterns in your nose, it could be any of the sciences, microscopic or big.
Art or music.
Yeah, art or music and so that then is like a method of focus, and it's something that for you is sacred. It could be like a particular mantra or a particular song or music that really helps you, or a particular story. And that then is what allows you, and that allows you to focus your mind. And in focusing the mind, all of a sudden, what is being focused on, you then start to see much more deeply. So you have this concentration, and then in the concentration, you go, oh, it's deep, it's beautiful. And then you start to get these moments of vairagyam, of which are, wow, and you're listening, you're observing, and eventually that would be called dhyana or meditation. And then at a certain point, uh, it becomes deeper and deeper. And it's like,
And so sometimes what, a beginning student, or I certainly did this for many years, is I thought, okay, I will practice Abhyasa and Vairagyam because it was, they're listed in the Yoga Sutra, and this is what you do, the action you can take in order to help still the mind. And so the initial effort to do that is fine and good and essential. But then as you do more and more of it, what starts to happen is this snowball effect where, because you are successful at focusing, the process within the embodiment of focusing the mind, which ends up focusing the entire embodied experience, meaning the body and the breath and the different levels of mind, that automatically starts to take over. And the idea of, well, now then I will do vairagyam, and so I will stop doing this, is less relevant to you when you've practiced a little longer. And what sometimes happens in modern yoga is we've ended up splitting them apart a little bit, the Abhyasa and Vairagyam, and thinking, okay, now I'll do my Abhyasa, and later today I'll do the Vairagyam, and which is reflected in things like, well, I'm going to do this extreme, Ashtanga practice in the morning where I'm, really huffing and puffing and doing all the hard poses. And then I'll go to a restorative class, or I'll do some restorative yoga in the afternoon, or, something like that. And they are not related within your bigger picture of your life. And that's, that's just an example of how the human tendency is to think in things that are diametrically opposed rather than things that are a continuum, whereas most things, in
really
fact, are
if you look
continuums.
closely at them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one thing that I have found interesting to play with these two ideas is to have when I'm involved in doing something, let's say I've become very passionate about, understanding the nature of a plant, say of the bamboo plant. And so I really focus and really focus and really focus on it. That I then, as I am doing that and become more and more focused with my mind, there are moments where the mind just, it's almost like, when you're breathing, there's a kind of, you have to inhale again. So you're focusing, and then you need a breath to just come in. And in that gap, which is the vairagyam part, to then let the mind sort of track what's happening in the body. Like, is there tension in the body because of the effort that I'm making? Or is there sort of dullness because of the non-effort? And to just notice that level of the entire experience being brought into this process of Abhyasa and Vairagyam. And so when we teach, often we'll teach in an asana class, we'll teach the idea of, action and counteraction, and that certain things, often the pelvic floor or other parts of the body, are toned meaning they're not engaged fully, nor are they released fully. But there's the synthesis that has occurred. And so as we are acting in the world, I don't know what you think about this, but the idea of as you're engaged in thinking about Abhyasa Vairagyam, to then have these moments where you consciously try to check in with, what's my skin feeling like? What are my muscles feeling like?
Yeah, and then you're actually doing a deliberate, and this is actually the technique in yoga asana and pranayama that's really is traditional, that the sensations that are arising are to be observed. And then you'll watch as you try to observe them, because you'll then do it in the form of abhyasa. Because to do abhyasa on it, you have to have a preconception about it. And it turns out that this will help you. Oh, I'm just going to meditate on sensation patterns in my body. But you have to have almost like a photo in your mind or something of what that is. Then you go looking for it. And so, but then as you practice and you're working with breath and with posture, because of the fact that prana and chitta are so intimately connected, that the pattern in the prana or sensation patterns instantaneously is connected to a chitta pattern or a mental pattern. And so this is what makes it very interesting. So if I have that desire or intention to feel, what's actually going on in the realm of sensation. And so you start out, and then you notice, oh, I'm just looking for good sensations. Or I love that one tingly feeling in my skin, when I would do this particular, and then I ignore all of the others because now I'm out. But if you continuously practice, and this is why one should do the abhyasa, as the Yoga Sutra says, over a long period of time in an uninterrupted way, with the almost a devotional intention, like, oh, let me look to see what is really true to me,
Yeah.
and in that way you'll start to notice gradually other sensations, and you go, and then finally, if you're able just to observe the sensation as sensation, then you've come to a much deeper place in the yoga. But you have to start doing something that is, you would not say, that a beginner would say, oh, that's not Vairagyam. And so there's some people who, they read the Yoga Sutra and they say, well, I'm not going to do Abhyasa because I do Sankhya. And so I'll just start with the Vairagyam and I'll finish with the Vairagyam.
And there are others who just say, well, I'm going to forget the Vairagyam because that sounds really boring and it's
Yeah,
not
the
going to get
Vairagyam
me
is boring.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And we tend to have a personality type, that, prefers, just like we have a personality type that prefers inhale or exhale pattern, but we do with Abhyasa and Vairagyam. And so to know yourself well enough to know that, oh yeah, I tend to be a little more type A, maybe the Abhyasa one is easier for me, maybe, I can really put that sincere effort into finding a bit more balance. And when you were talking about the devotional quality of these practices that we do, I think a wonderful aspect of devotion that sometimes is not spoken of is this sincerity, meaning devotion not necessarily to a god or a king or another, something outside of yourself, but a sincerity and an earnestness where it's almost a sense of innocence, and an effort in a sense to really touch into something intuitive that is there, that you have a gut feeling is part of you, but you don't quite know what it is, and so it doesn't become devotion. I'm going to do all these
Yeah, conceptually
rituals.
devotional.
Yeah,
But it's
it's got this
functionally,
sincerity to it.
it's got sincerity and it's the sense of sharing, but without the necessity of creating a whole theory about the other. But it's also like, it's not an egotistical interest. And so
And that relates, in a sense, to this idea of confusing Abhyasa and Vairagyam as, and becoming too full of
yeah.
Abhyasa or
So if you do
Vairagyam.
Abhyasa without much Vairagyam, that means you've got an attitude. And why are you doing the practice? Because you're not looking and you're not listening to your own body or your own mind to see what the feedback is. And so it's a kind of brutal thing. And then, so the common practice, I'll just do this while I'm young. And then when I hit retirement age, then I'm just going to do Vairagyam. And there's, of course, a physical tendency to, you become more sensitive as you grow older. But still, the Abhyasa Vairagyam will be totally interfaced.
Yeah.
But traditionally, there's this belief that Abhyasa is a lower practice than Vairagyam. And there's a famous story. And it's about a king who, of course, is very influenced by the priests who are there informing him, and he becomes fascinated by yoga, and so he says, "I just can't stand it. I'm giving up my kingdom." And because his wife, the queen, was actually very functional, and she took care of everything. And so he said, I have this higher calling, and I'll leave you with the mundane things, like,
I've heard this story before.
yeah, like,
I've lived this story.
yeah, and you can take care of the cooking and all those people and the politics. And he goes off to the forest and is seeking that. Meanwhile, in the story, his wife, who is enlightened,
Oh, that part I haven't lived.
yeah, she goes about the business of becoming a benevolent, and this is thousands of years ago, and she's a benevolent queen, and she is just in complete joy to listen to serve, and to help people, and to help them appreciate each other and to help each other. And finally, he comes back out of the forest because he's feels, like something is wrong, and he goes back and he hears the teachings from his wife, the queen, and he goes, and all of a sudden, then he regains his functionality and his ability to serve other people. And so then he becomes a functional king, because that was, the tools he had. And so,
And
profound.
the moral of all of these stories really is that we can do these practices and do them well in a certain way, but they really don't produce fruits that are of benefit to ourselves, but more particularly to others, if we, and that's why it's talked about doing them with devotion, etc. But if we are not doing them in a way that truly interfaces with others, and so there are times when going off into the woods and
It's a good thing.
that's a great thing. And there are times when just putting your nose to the grindstone and working hard, that's a good thing. But the better thing is when those things are done in the context of daily life. And they make one agile enough to be able to roll with the punches that come and to maintain a sense of balance and equanimity. And the combination of those two, of Abhyasa and Vairagyam, really is this, again, an example of finding practices that bring balance. And they bring balance so that we can show up more fully. And so if, they're practices that seem very, very simple to do, but they also have this side to them where if you start to try to get something out of them or try to do them for a particular reason, rather than with this idea of a sincere devotion, they go off into left field.
Yeah, and that's quite normal. And then, but if the practice has become grounded, as it will, you'll notice that, because that'll be part of and you'll say, oh, and it's just like you'll see the emotion, the attachment, but then you won't become caught in a loop. The classic thing, you become angry at your anger. And you have to be able to see, in terms of Vairagyam, you have to be able to see all kinds of things without repulsion or attachment, but just to see them with a sense of wonder. And it could be horribly wonderful, like modern politics or something, or like, and that's quite essential. And so that's the ability when you see, even when your mind, say, goes into and is doing something that you don't approve of. And this is particularly if you're a strong practitioner and you're doing well and all of this, you'll have a shadow side in your mind. And then as you start to really practice, you'll have this more superficial layers of Abhyasa and Vairagyam, and they will then all of a sudden start to manifest in terms of, the samskaras, and all of a sudden there's the difficult side, and you'll still have like this, oh, I don't want the darkness, I don't want, and then you'll see, oh, I can't actually do the Vairagyam, but that thought in itself is composed of the prakriti that you're observing.
Right.
And so with practice, you're able to go deeper and deeper. And so then they say, well, this Vairagyam, when it's done that way, that actually leads into samadhi. And then initially there's samadhi accompanied by, discursive thinking, or then subtle thinking, and then joy, and then the principle of asmita, or I amness, or just of I, as an, and then there's the other samadhi called the other, which is asampragata, and that is that experience of vairagyam, or release. But that doesn't, and what happens then, they say, well, then you still have the samskaras embodied in the history of your embodiment that are then going to, at a certain point, after 10 seconds or after 10 minutes or years, or maybe one, produce, the kind of the other side of the mind and different layers of the thought and the practice. And so eventually, so the Abhyasa and Vairagyam are both, that's the way the prakriti, the creative energy, the vibrance, that's the way it's functioning. And so in the final release, it's not like there's Purusha letting go of Prakriti, it's hard to describe,
Yeah.
but it's nice. So they say.
Yeah. And so you start where you are, and you start just with an awareness of what these two ideas bring into the practice. And then as you continue to practice, you notice, if you can, the times where you are tending to be more filled with, abhyasa, and other times when you're more filled with vairagyam. Notice when you are in situations in the world, like in our current world, it is a world where you are rewarded for effort and pushing and going ahead and doing and doing. And then there's the counterculture, the hippie movement, that's like rewarded for not doing that. And when those two sides of you, which we all have within us, when those merge, that's when you start to get into these first tastes of some form of freedom, which eventually could lead to enlightenment. So it's kind of an interesting and fun aspect of the practice to, as you go through your asana practice, as you go through your pranayama, as you go through your interfacing with others, to notice this, as you said in the beginning, the fact that abhyasa and vairagyam are happening all the time. And notice when you can have some direction that you put in those to
Yeah.
so that you find a bit more balance rather than sort of checking out of the situation.
Yeah.
So
Good. Oh, we should do a little Vairagyam
okay,
right now.
I'm into it.
So we can say,
Yeah,
thank you very much for listening.
yeah, for coming and listening, and we will see you next time. But please keep practicing.
With Vairagyam. Can you practice Vairagyam?
I don't
That
know.
doesn't make any sense. Thank you very much. Take care.